the hardest part is getting feedback from the betas and saying, this chapter was not engaging at all. And I'm like, now I have to rewrite. So it can be a little frustrating. But the great thing about me that I use it with my ASD, with my Asperger's, is I'm really good at hyper focusing. So when I'm really deep into a project, I'm just in that project.
G'day everyone, thanks for being here. If you haven't yet subscribed to support the channel, please take a moment to do so. If you also want to be notified when new interviews are uploaded, make sure you tap that notification bell. Today's guest is an author. She has penned multiple books in a series called the Aeon Chronicles. It's a sci-fi type fantasy and romance series. If you are interested in writing, today's episode's for you because we're going to be talking more around the process. Now, April M. Woodard actually is on the spectrum and is an advocate for ASD, and she also helps other authors in their writing journey. So if you're a writer, I hope you really enjoy this episode. So grab a drink, sit down and listen to and or watch this episode with my guest, April M. Woodard. Today's episode is brought to you by Applaudible.net. Thanks for joining me, April. How are you going over there at the moment?
Oh, we're doing good over here. Thank you for asking.
So you're the author of multiple books, and you're also an advocate for the Asperger's or autism, so the spectrum, the ASD. So we'll talk about your books and we'll talk about your advocacy, and also you're a person who helps other authors. So you're a mentor to other authors. So we'll start with your writing journey, and we'll come to your books, and I'll make sure I link those in the description below. But I want to first, I want to talk about your passion straight up for writing and where that came from.
So the reason I write, I used to write when I was younger. I used to do a lot of poetry just to get my emotions out. And it really did help. Like, writing has always been my go-to. I had journals. I had, like I said, I did the poetry, but it seemed like writing was what I went to just dump everything out on paper. And so I just kind of continued doing that. And then I took a really long break from writing out my emotions. I burned all my journals because I had some stuff in there I just didn't want to look back on. But so when I started getting back into writing a couple years ago, it was after my daughter was born, and I was trying to figure out, well, I don't want to be just a stay-at-home mom. I want like an actual purpose for me and what I want. And that's when I started drafting book one.
Mm-hmm. So the process for you of writing is, or was early days, an escapism, more or less?
Yes.
If you had some young people right now who don't understand the benefits of, say, writing poetry or writing in a journal or journalism, journaling is the word, not journalism, journaling. Yeah. So what would you say to young people who haven't or aren't aware of the concept of journaling and putting information into a journal?
Well, what it does is it lets you first get off your chest. Like, especially journaling, you can just, you don't have to hold any secrets. You can just put everything out and just get it out of your system. And it also helps you when you read back, reflect on, oh, well, these are the choices I made, and maybe I could have done something different. And so it kind of gives you a way to self-therapy yourself, like as if you were talking to a therapist, but you're just talking to yourself. And it just really helps you see how far you've come. Also, as far as like if you were to do poetry or do a fictional story, I think it's great to kind of put like a character or someone that's going through the same thing you are, but you're putting them through it and not yourself necessarily. So you're kind of looking on the outside, and then you can give that character a way out of a situation. Even if it's a complete elaborate way, it still makes you feel better that somebody got a victory. So I think it's been wonderful therapy to me all around.
So what have you done to improve your writing? Are you just someone who, like, have you followed a process to improve writing? Have you studied anything to help your writing?
Oh man, I've read a lot of craft books on writing. I've also had a lot of people give me feedback. Feedback, I think, is crucial. If you're going to be a writer, you have to be able to take criticism or critiques. And I've learned as I went, just reading my own stuff, and it just takes doing it. You just have to write and kind of look at your own writing and be like, well, is this good enough? And reading books definitely is a must. If you want to be a really good writer, you have to read, because then you see how other people do it, and then you find your own voice by seeing, okay, this person has this style, or this is how this person wrote this. How can I make this my own and put everything in my own words and do my own book?
How long would it take you to come up with a concept, and what makes you decide what you're going? Obviously, you've got a series of books, so you've started creating an environment and a character, and you've built that into a series of stories. But where did that idea for those books and the characters and the landscapes and things come from?
Well, this particular series spurred from a dream. I had a very vivid dream about these characters and the consequences of their actions. And then I wanted to take it a little further. And so that's where this particular series spurred from. And I started drafting that first book. And then I just trashed it. I put it away almost. And then I picked it back up. But it took me 3 full years to actually, from start to taking a break to finishing, 3 full years to really get it out. But that process was just constantly changing the story and changing the outline and changing the characters. But it could take me from the starting process on the second book, since I knew what I was doing. It only took me about a month to really get the idea fleshed out. And then I had that one done in about a year and a half.
How
So
many?
from story concept, it just really depends on how passionate I am about the story. If I know the characters and I see them vividly, I can go right into that story and get it completely down, no problem.
Do you enter a state of deep work when you do that? Do you, like you say, it takes you about a month to flesh out the first part of the story? And then obviously there's drafts and drafts and multiple drafts and edits and people reading and feedback and things like that, to clean things up. And you probably have other thought processes that get added and removed. So
Yeah.
I'm speaking to your process there, but that's what I imagine would be the process. You can speak to that, but what is that sort of draft process, and how can that be frustrating?
Oh, it could be absolutely frustrating, especially when you get feedback from a beta. Because sometimes if you know how you want the story to go, but you don't know how to get there, a lot of people call that writer's block. I don't personally believe in writer's block. I think it's just either there's something going on in your real life that's keeping you from being able to write and concentrate, or maybe you just don't know where the story can go. Maybe you've come up with an idea and you're like, I want my characters here, but we can't get there. And so I think there's different issues that come along, but it's definitely, I think the hardest part is getting feedback from the betas and saying, this chapter was not engaging at all. And I'm like, now I have to rewrite. So it can be a little frustrating. But the great thing about me that I use it with my ASD, with my Asperger's, is I'm really good at hyper focusing. So when I'm really deep into a project, I'm just in that project. Nothing can really distract me. And if someone does come in and try to distract me during my writing time, then usually it is kind of irritating, because I'm like, now I've lost the scene, because I get deep into the story as if I'm there.
I was going to ask, do you get in a state of flow? And you've pretty much described what mastery, and when people become masters of their art or their craft, they can get in sport. They often call it being in
Yeah.
the zone, and it's a reference. But for writers, they call it, or the reference, this concept of flow. So what happens for you when you get in that to that point? Like you just described, it's like you're seeing the scene. Like explain how that takes your writing to a whole new level.
So I have a very vivid imagination anyway, but it's like I'm not even sitting in the chair. I'm feeling like I'm in the characters, and right there in the actual scene. Almost like the way I do all my writing is I picture it like a movie. So a scene will be going and going and repeating until I get it to where I want it and what the characters are going to say. And so I feel like I'm the director of, so when I say action, I'm in the zone, and I'm there. And if someone comes in, it's like some random actor or someone photobombing the shoot. But as long as I'm able to direct it and see through the character's eyes, we just keep filming. And that's how I always see and do it. And that is exactly how I'm in the zone. It's like everything else disappears and I'm just in the movie of my story.
So that's good that you're in the state of flow and people can come in and interfere with that process. And I understand that would be pretty frustrating. But do you ever interfere with your own process where you're in a scene and then you find that you've got some nagging sort of, thing on the on the periphery that you think, oh, I might have to add that, but you're in the moment, so you can't. So does that also become a distraction at times?
Oh, it does. It really does, especially if I've come to a certain part and there's a character that I need to like do something with. Like we call it a character arc. And so I'm like, oh, we need to make a big impact. He needs to have something really big happen. And so I might get to a part of a story where I was like, this is a great place to do it. And if I'm editing or revising, I'm like, I can't really touch it right now. So I have to make notes. That way I can move past it. But sometimes I will be in the zone and then I have to stop completely and take care of something because I'm so afraid I'm going to lose that moment I'm feeling for the character or maybe feeling for the scene. Or maybe I really want to describe the emotion someone's going through. So that means I have to stop with the plot line and really go into the characters because I'm very character driven writer. And so all of my characters are very relatable and very real for my readers. And so, yeah, sometimes that can be a little distracting is when I'm trying to get through the plot, but then a character's like, no, we need to focus on me for a minute.
Mm. You sort of answered some of my questions I was going to ask there around how you keep that idea. So you take notes and sometimes you actually say, okay, this is too important that I need to gravitate
Yes.
and actually put that in that moment. How do you come up with the characters and the personas that surround those characters? Because they're going to interact with each other. So is there a dynamic in the characters or traits that you feel that have to be, like any friend that you would have, you're going to like some attributes of them, and then there's others that you're not going to like. So you want, I imagine, again, that you want the reader to understand their persona and the traits that they're going to like and hate. So how do you develop those characteristics in the characters?
I think a lot of it for me is I take people I've known and kind of put them together and make them like one person. Like I always tell my readers that the inspiration for my two love interests in the book is basically my husband as two people. There's the egotistical side of him, and then there's the sweet and caring heroic side of him. And I separated. And so that's how I kind of made my two love interests. And because a lot of this book is very much my feelings and emotions coming through the main character. But then I have the two love interest characters that also have some of my emotions. And so when I'm putting them together and trying to get them, I guess, to be able to interact properly, like I said, when it comes to movie stuff, I just think of what kind of character, and also I'm also inspired by characters I've seen in movies or TV shows. And so they're all kind of like a blend of all kinds of different inspirations, and I just pull from all those places. But as far as interacting and making sure it's going to work, I don't know. I'd never really had a problem with overthinking that or thinking about it really at all. This is how I want my character to be. These are the situations I'm putting them in. And, if I need to tweak a little bit with one of the characters, I usually do.
Mm. How much of you are in the main character, do you think? How much of your persona
She is,
yeah.
she's definitely braver than me. And I think that's because in the beginning, like in book one, it's definitely a lot more of me and my insecurities as of like doubting plans and, not having enough faith in the process or the plan that has been set out for this character. But she's also very, very brave and very stubborn. And so I put a lot of qualities also in my characters that I wish I was.
Mm-hmm.
And so like all the heroic things or all the things that I admire about certain people that just I wish I could be, I put in those characters as well. And so I think I put all of my past insecurities, I've gotten better, but all my past insecurities into her. Like I did put one thing, I'm afraid, terrified of heights, and I've actually put that literally into my character in book two. So
it's intriguing that, it doesn't surprise me that there would be traits. And I was just wondering how much of that main character is actually you, given you've put the love interest as being, two
husbands.
polar opposites of your husband. So it's one of those things that is probably, I'd imagine, most authors do, or not necessarily, but may look at some of their own humanity to give humanity to any character. Obviously, you have to understand a perspective that you're trying to present. So that's all very good. So you're on the spectrum. And how has this whole process been for you, knowing that you have a diagnosis of Asperger's?
So when I was younger, it was a lot harder because, like I said, my imagination has always run wild. It's always done its own thing. And so that's been very hard to control, especially when I was in school. I would just sit there and make up stories constantly and daydream. And so I would get in trouble a lot in school, and I didn't make the best grades. But I felt I was meant to do something other than just sitting there and doing algebra. So, and I don't even use algebra to write. So, it was very difficult as a child, but I found that as an adult and with the career that I've taken on, that I can use what a lot of people see as disabilities as my strengths, like the hyper focus and, my wild imagination and just being able to zone out. A lot of people will look at me and be like, April, what are you doing? I was like, oh, I was just thinking of a story or I was just there in another world. And so to some other people, those super creative minds, it may from the outside look strange, but on the inside, if someone could just get into a creative person's mind, they would really see all the inner workings of their imagination. And I'm thinking that's how it was for a lot of famous writers, that they probably were looked at as strange or hermits, but they were creating stories and lives for other people to live in temporarily. Just every time you read a book, you live a new life.
Exactly, it's true, and probably every time you write a book, you get to live another life as well. So
That's right.
the hyperfocus element of mastery is something that when you get to a point of creation, whether you be an artist, a painter, whatever you're creating, that sort of hyper focus doesn't hurt. So to have that attribute is a strength. So so Asperger's, it's one of the things that they identify people with Asperger's have. So it is a strength and can be
Can
your
be.
yeah, or is in your case too. So it can also be a disadvantage. There are some people like it is a spectrum disorder now. So there is scaling on the degree. So you're considered high functioning. What does this mean for you because you're an advocate for ASD? So do you want to talk a little bit about your advocacy and what being an author does for you, helping other people who have been diagnosed as on the spectrum?
Well, I usually like to talk about how it is that escapism and it's also that therapy. And I also, when I speak about how you can use it as a strength, because not everybody probably wants to be a writer, but if they are ASD, high functioning, using that hyper focus on something like, because I'm self-taught. I didn't go to a college or anything to learn everything I did about the craft or formatting the book even. The formatting took a lot of time to learn, but I was able to sit there. And that's something about a lot of high functioning autistics is when they're obsessed with the topic, they want to learn every little detail and every little fact about what they're obsessing over. And so my obsession was learning everything I could about how to be a great writer. And so when I go and speak and advocate, I try to also let the parents know that the reason we get so upset when we're bothered and we're working on something is because we're so into it. And when we get distracted, we lose that moment and maybe we can't get back to it. And so that's why I say I usually have a sign on my door saying, Mommy's working. If the kids will need me, they know to go to Daddy during my writing days. And that's because I know I'm going to be so into it. And if I get disturbed, I'll probably be very agitated if I get bothered during my writing session. And so I like to tell parents that, you don't need to take offense. It's not you. It's just they're so into their work or what they're passionate about that it really hurts them to be disturbed. I don't think anybody likes to be bothered while they're working really hard on something. And I think for us on the spectrum, when we get that one little distraction, it could mess the whole entire day up for us and we can't get focused again. So that is one of the disabilities, I think, for me, is when I am really into something and then I get disrupted, I sometimes can't get back into it. And so then it's very upsetting to have that whole day wasted because there was an issue with, like, maybe the kids were arguing, or maybe there's something that we have to address family wise, or maybe something, I get a phone call and it's something that's probably nothing bad, but someone wanted to chat, so my mind will be somewhere else. And so I try to talk to the parents and kids and let them know that for the parents, that just try to have understanding that your child's probably not going to be what you want them to be, to just kind of accept that they're going to make a choice in their career. Maybe it's photography, and maybe they're not going to make a lot of money, but them being happy is what matters. As long as they can sustain themselves, I don't see any problem with a career choice as long as they can take care of themselves. So that's usually what I advocate for, is just the person that's on the spectrum being happy, and for the parents that might not be on the spectrum to be happy as well, and try to bring those together to make both happy.
Yeah, it's good because you're giving voice to obviously a younger generation coming through and helping the parents who are probably trying to work out, how do I work with and manage this situation with my child? And you're basically saying, hey, it's cool. I'm okay. They'll be okay. You just need to understand that, let them be. And you're giving voice to those that can't speak to that, because you've lived it and now you're an adult. So you, as an adult, you have a voice that you can be heard by other adults. So that's huge. You also have your children, you just mentioned, they too have been diagnosed as ASD. So you're managing your diagnoses with non-medications and things like that. So what's the approaches that you use to to manage those scenarios where you do get frustrated?
I manage everything naturally and with self-help, basically. Being a parent on the spectrum, like actually having Asperger's and then my children having Asperger's, I think it's really been an advantage, because not only do I see what I feel from being a parent and having to deal with all their meltdown moments and all their frustrations, I can understand it because I've been where they've been. But I also understand it as a parent and understand it's not easy. It is really hard. And so I think it's really helped knowing that, to be able to talk to my children and try to find ways to work out certain situations. As you said earlier, we were talking how you tell the child before something happens to try to like prepare them has really benefited me and my children. So if my husband plans to do something, I'm always like, you got to tell me, and you got to tell me when and where and what I'm going to expect, so I can mentally prepare for that moment. I'm not big on surprises. He's very spontaneous. Mm-hmm. But I've noticed that my children like to be prepared, and I like to be prepared. And then I've also shown them, okay, this is how we're going to handle it if we're going to be disappointed that we don't get to do the things we planned on. And so I think it's just been really great being able to problem solve, basically. And I kind of reverse engineer that with the fact that of everything I went through to kind of help my boys. And we also take supplements. The boys don't sleep. I don't sleep well sometimes, but the boys don't sleep well sometimes. So they do melatonin. I will do certain supplements like lysine, anything I might be deficient in. The boys seem to be doing okay, but we take like just regular vitamins to help out. And then there's some other supplements I take that help, but just trying to stay healthy has been the biggest benefit to me. We don't eat junk food or anything like that. We try to stay away from diets, like just certain things. We're not on like the huge kick with the diet, but we try to just eat healthy in general because we know it makes our bodies feel better.
Are you seeing any hyper focus or obsessive behaviors in the sense of what your children themselves are gravitating to as interests? Because that tends to be something as well that like you say, they can latch on to something that really interests them and dive in deep. So do they have interest at this stage, given their age, that you're noticing?
I really wish they were, but no, it's more along the lines of they all like watching how kid YouTubers do their channels. And so I've kind of let them dive into a little bit of that. But as far as hyper focused, Gabriel does love robots, and he says he wants to be, and he's my middle child, he's 11. He wants to be like Big Hero 6. He wants to do the battle bots. And I'm like, well, that's cool though. Like if we could figure out how to work with that of him engineering, that would be great. His father's an engineer, so it would be actually a great career. But my oldest, I don't really know what he's into. He hasn't really shown any kind of thing. So I'm just going to let him kind of try different things and see what he likes. And when he says, this is what I want to do, we're going to go for it. And then if he changes his mind, fine. And then we'll go for something else.
Do you mentioned school was a little bit tough for you because of the distraction and daydreaming and being off in other spaces. Do you think that the school system like caters to people like yourself or understands them? Like, did you find your experience was good at school, or do you felt that you were misunderstood?
Oh, so back in the 80s and 90s, I don't think they really knew. I was diagnosed in my 20s with bipolar. So they still didn't really know, even when I got into my 20s, because that was a misdiagnosis. But as far as the schools, like my children, they go to a really great school. My oldest is back in public school. I homeschooled him for a year or a couple years really, and I homeschool my middle child all the time now because he's more on a level 2 functioning high autistic. But I found that for me, no one understood, and it was very difficult. I think the school system needs a lot of support, and they probably need people in there that know more about ASD, because you can't just give a teacher a class on ASD and expect them to understand. I think parent liaisons would be exceptional to have in every school for an ASD child. It would also help the parents understand what to do at home with homework and things like that. Because after a long day, the child, if they're ASD, is not going to want to come home and do more work. They need to relax and, let go of everything they had to do in school, because you're in this confined place with all these expectations. And so you feel like you're in this like vice of just everything that you might not even want to do. And so I think for schools these days, it's getting better, but I definitely would love to see more support for especially teachers, even because the teachers just a lot of the time have their hands tied and they can only do so much.
Do you think that, like, you're speaking to parents, are you speaking to schools as well? Do you attend schools to talk about your experience as a writer and your experience growing up?
I didn't get COVID happened, so I haven't had a chance. We have plans to do that. But I do plan, there's a local triad psych and just opened up. And so I'll be working with them when things get back to normal with COVID, possibly as a parent liaison, and then speaking about my book. So we have scheduled it, but it's dates to be determined on as far as that. But speaking to more of the children in a group, and then also teens and adults in groups, like social groups. And so, yes, I'll be able to be a speaker there as soon as things kind of get back to normal. But I just took this on probably about the end of last year. I made the choice to really start getting vocal about my ASD.
I was going to say, do you feel a little bit blessed in a sense to have that voice, given the work you've done in the short space of writing the 3 novels and now getting noticed, because they are selling quite well from what I understand. So and I've seen comments in our group, so we connected in a Tea with Gary V chat. So
That's right.
and some people you saw you were in there and they're saying, oh, I read your book and things like that. I'm like, who's this lady? So that was the connection. So we've been bantering back and forth for a little while. So it's nice to finally actually meet you. But do you find that this for you, makes things feel like there is value in what you've actually experienced, being, on the spectrum, that you now have a voice and a power that you didn't have through your work as an author?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I didn't really realize how much of a voice I had. I always looked at it as, because a lot of people say it's a disability, it's a disability. And I'm looking at myself like I'm not disabled, because with the level 1 autistics, we do have debilitating things happen to us every day as far as our anxiety and a lot of depression. But I feel like I can tell people they can overcome it because I'm living a very happy life. Even my boys are. And yes, there's rough days. I'm not saying there's not. And we have those times where we just, have those little meltdowns. But I feel like they can live the majority of their life happy. And I think if I hadn't experienced all the hardships I did when I was younger, I would not be as strong as I am today. And I wouldn't be the person I am today and even have a story to tell. So I think it helps me be relatable to not only the children, but the parents, because I've lived through both.
Mm. And you're not only an advocate for ASD, you're actually mentoring authors on Instagram and things like that. So people now are connecting with you. Do you want to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about what you're doing there in helping other people write their books?
So I don't give a lot of writing advice, so to speak. If someone approaches me and is like, what about show don't tell, which is a big issue usually for new writers. So I do help them with that, but I'm more on the marketing area of how to get seen, how to put yourself out there, and more on how to stop your self-doubt. It's more of a motivational Instagram handle of just because I see all these authors that just hide behind their screens. And I'm like, it's okay to be on video. It's okay to be like, I wrote a book, because a lot of them feel just ashamed or terrified of judgment. And I'm like, but you wrote it. So you could hide behind the shadows, or you could actually make more sales if you would just put yourself out there and didn't care what anybody thought, because you love your book. So that's all that matters. And that's what I tell them. I'm like, if you don't like it and you can't stand behind it, then you shouldn't put it out there. That's the number one thing I always tell them. 10 years from now, if you can still pick it up and be like, I'm really proud of this, I tell them, then go for it.
I was in radio for a short stint, and I learnt I'd play a lot of independent artists, and I'd be listening to music that I didn't even like myself, because I wasn't playing it for me.
Yeah.
I was playing it for the audience, which you do on radio. You don't like all the songs you play, and in doing that, I was getting calls for songs. I'd think, oh, what's this song? I get a call and say, what's this song? I love it. What's it called? And it made me realize that there's an audience for everything. So
Yeah.
people are worried about judgment, but the fact is you might have a following of 100 people, but it's still people who enjoy your work. Well, that's pretty cool, with what you're doing with providing some advice. You mentioned there the reference to show don't tell. Do you want to explain what that is to the audience? Or me even?
Absolutely. So, or me. I know. I was like, here's going to be a term that probably people don't know, unless that's like doctors. It's like the scalpel. Like most people know what a scalpel is, but like if it wasn't a TV thing, like nobody would know. So, show don't tell is basically when you have a story, there's a certain way that you can write. You can either write it like most people that do memoirs do a lot of telling because they're telling it from their point of view. You don't need all that vivid imagery. However, if you are trying to say the moon looks very bright and pretty, you need to rephrase that to how can you make the sentence sound more alluring to the reader or more vivid. It's just the wording a lot of the time, but also you don't want to have, say you have a setting and you want people to know maybe like this character lives in a huge house. So you could say, well, it had 6 bedrooms and the kitchen was enormous and yada, yada, yada. Or you could say it took the maid 3 days to clean the house and she just left out the door, something like that. So it's just a matter of how you tell the story. And that takes a lot of practice, but a lot of new writers come into it and they're like, I don't understand, or they don't understand how to do a deep point of view instead of a shallow point of view. And so that also is like deep point of view is looking through the character's eyes and really seeing almost like as if you were the director and you were looking through a camera lens. And then describing all the emotions taking place because of that. So there is a lot to it. I think when I first got into it, I was like, I'm just going to write a book. And I thought that's how you did it. And then I realized real quick that no, that's not how it's done. You really have to work on it. It's just like any other craft, like woodworking or dancing, anything. It's the same thing. It takes a lot of practice to get good.
Thanks for clarifying that, because I had a thought in my mind of what it might represent, and I was way off the mark. So I thought I'd better check.
I don't know if I explained it very good. I feel like my brain was all over the place with that one.
So
there's an easy definition I'd have to look up.
The way I would interpret it in an easy format is being painting a picture with words. So they're giving people a scene in their mind of something that's more than just stating what it is. So that's how
exactly.
I translated what you explained. So I think that's exactly what you said, but I've just tried to cram that down into something that I understood, and that's how I interpret it in my mind. So that's pretty
perfectly
cool. I have a friend that I interviewed on another episode who is a movie director, writer. He talks about having
awesome.
having characters who have save the cat moment. So do you approach that in your characters? Do you have like the villain, which obviously one of the lovers potentially is a villain, or there's rivalry. So but you can't make someone that hateable that people want to put the book down because they actually hate the character. So how do you approach the concept of having a save the cat moment, something that makes the villain likable still?
Well, that's really been easy for me because I see, as far as like people that I've had contact with, even if it was someone that I really, really didn't like, especially in like school, I would still always look at them and be like, well, why are they being mean? And usually it was because they had something going on at home or they had something they were dealing with. And so every time I make a character, even if it's a villain or not, I always give them a lot of faults, but I always have a backstory of the reason for their faults or the reason they do bad things. And so even my villains, a lot of people feel sorry for. I think there's one villain that they probably don't feel sorry for because they're just like a despicable person and do terrible things. And my characters are supposed to hate him and my readers are supposed to hate him. But there is one character that's more of an anti-hero, and he does have this like soft spot, and you really don't like him in the first book, but in the second book you're like, oh no, I'm starting to really like him. And so doing the save the cat moment is just, it's been very easy for me because I've noticed how it is done in movies and other books, and that you do have to make some kind of part of them very vulnerable. And so I always do that. There's usually some kind of vulnerability to the character.
I was actually going to use that word and ask it. It's like we're on the wavelength together here. No, you answered questions before I asked them. It's quite intriguing, but it's interesting because I never understood what a save the cat moment was until it was explained to me. And then now I look at movies and stories in a completely different light.
Right.
So I think of like the character of Newman in Seinfeld, and I look at the Louis Litt in Suits, and come to understand that there's elements of you that just hate the behaviors of those characters, but there's something when there's a moment where everyone else is struggling, they come to the fore with some heroic thing that you just don't expect, which makes you like them that little bit more each time. Now I just look at the world of writing and or video, TV and movies completely differently. I felt like a secret was unveiled when he told me about it, and he said, oh, there's books written on it and everything. I'm like, yeah, but you're a writer, so you understand the process. So look, I think that's all very interesting, all very good. Is there any secrets or tips that you want to lend any authors that might be watching today that you think have helped you where you were struggling with a period and then you found a technique that worked for you?
I always tell fellow writers and authors that if they feel like they're getting writer's block, because like I said, I don't believe in writer's block, but if they feel stuck, to just step back and take a breather and put the document away It's all right. You don't have to write every day. I know there's a lot of writers that say write every day, but some people get burnt out on it. And I think they feel guilty for not writing. And I want to let them know that you don't have to write every single day, that it's okay to take a step back and take a breath. I'll take 2 weeks, sometimes a month off from looking at my manuscript, and I come back to it and I'm like, oh, this is so easy now. Like, this is where I had, this plot hole, or this is where I was struggling. And so I feel like if they would just step back and take a break, it would help tremendously with their work, because they're not so stressed out over the document. They can just step away from it. And that is probably one of my biggest advice for writers.
So I studied journalism at university, and when I write, I'm not a fan of writing, but sometimes I can get in that state of flow where words just seem to, you feel like you're channeling something. And one of the things I learned, if you have this concept of writer's block that you described, is what we were taught as journalists is to look at someone in the room like you're telling them a story, even if there was no one there, and say it like you were telling them at the story. So that was a methodology that I applied to from a journalistic perspective if I was writing something, and particularly like news, because news is telling people what's happening. So they say if you get stuck telling, like writing a news sort of story, turn around like there's someone in the room and actually tell them what's happened. And that often unblocks you. So I'm not sure if that approach, I share that as a writer's perspective from a journalistic point of view, but writer's block, like you say, there are techniques that you can use to unblock those. So what I'll do is I'll put links to your books in the description, and also your Instagram and socials, so people can connect with you. They can purchase your books. I believe you said, if I read the chat room correctly, that you are focusing or working on another project, another book. Is that correct, or was I misled on that?
I will be finishing. Yeah, I'm finishing up the series with the 4th book, the very last book in the series, and then I will be working on. I might actually do a self-help, autism self-help book in between my next project. I'm not sure, but we will see. So it just depends on what calls me. But yes, I will be finishing the 4th book this year and get it ready for publish next year.
That's awesome. So appreciate your time with being with us here on People with a Passion. Make sure that to those that are interested in the books, we haven't given much away, which is good. So go up and have a look at the books, and there is some YouTube content that you can go and look at to give you a taste of potentially what you'll see in the series. But from what I've seen, apparently it's pretty popular. I haven't read the books. I'm open disclaimer there, but I have seen that there's a number of people who do know who April is, which is often a sign that she's written some books that people like. So that's pretty good. So thanks for your time, April. I really appreciate you giving your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I hope you liked this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and feel free to comment. If you haven't yet subscribed, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be advised of new interviews when they're uploaded. I hope you join us again sometime. Catch you later.